Hostage, a Todd Mills mystery, book 3 in the series. Arthur R.D. Zimmerman, publisher, Scribble Pub. Narrator, Eric Ost. Chapter 2. God, I can't believe I'm going to interview Mr. Gay Public Enemy Number 1, called Todd Mills from the kitchen of his 15th floor condo. Of course, it's only the biggest interview of my career. Nervous, replied Steve Rawlins, seated somewhere out in the living room. Oh, yeah. Good. You should be. The small kitchen was all white from the cabinets to the countertops, and even to the coffee maker, from which Todd now poured 2 mugs of very black coffee, lost in thought. He handed out 1 mug in each hand and crossed onto the oatmeal-colored carpeting that ran throughout the entire 2-bedroom apartment. He said, I just hope I don't screw it up. You won't. Rawlins, who was suffering from sinus problems, was settled in a black leather recliner by the balcony doors. The sun feels so good. Todd couldn't help but be apprehensive. However, because even though he was back on the air and had already done a couple of stories, this was his first actual interview as an openly gay reporter. Until last year, he'd been about as deep in the closet as you could get, trapped in an image of his own making. That of a dashing reporter, brown-haired, square-jawed, broad-shouldered, ever-charming, and model handsome, and straight. Well, divorced. Well, actually. Well, not straight. Not really. Well, not at all. Nevertheless, for almost 20 years, ever since he was a punk out of Northwestern University, he'd worked like a secret agent to hide his sexuality, lying, conniving, twisting until he nearly lost his mind. Instead, his lover, Michael, had been murdered, which in turn had outed Todd and changed his entire world. Todd handed Rawlins 1 of the mugs of coffee, then sat down in a nearby red chair, wondering how this had happened, how he'd found someone as wonderful as this man, Steve Rawlins. Though Todd had known in his teens that he was attracted to guys, though he'd once been married, though over the years he'd had anonymous sex and closeted relationships, this romance was different than any and all of them. Simply, never before had Todd been able to give himself both emotionally and sexually to one and the same person, male or female, and never before had he been so absolutely sure of one thing in particular. He reached out and put his hand on Rawlins' knee. I love you. Rawlins opened his mouth, presumably to respond in kind, but his head kept tilting back until a huge sneeze burst out of him. Todd laughed and said, Maybe I should go get you some tea instead of coffee. You know, I always wondered what it was like to be waited on hand and foot. He put his hand over Todd's. But just sit and relax. I'm fine. Yeah, but maybe a little. Don't worry. For you, I'll live. Todd took a sip of coffee and glanced outside. There wasn't anything particularly special about his apartment, except, of course, the view. And what a view it was, the likes of which were hard to find in this Midwestern pancake of a city. The floor plan was bent slightly so that 1 large window faced northeast and overlooked the trees of the parkway below, the red tile roof of an old beach club, a bit of Lake of the Isles, and in the distance the Oz-like towers of downtown. On the other side of the room, south-facing glass doors opened onto a balcony in Lake Calhoun, a large oval shape that filled almost the entire view. And if the warm weather kept up, thought Todd, eyeing the soggy but still frozen body of water, the ice might be gone within a matter of days, and there was no place where spring was more intense, more appreciated, yet more short-lived than in these northern plains. Gazing into the near future, Todd pictured the 2 of them walking and jogging and swimming, packing as much activity as possible into a single worship season. Noticing Rawlins squint with pain as he rubbed his forehead, Todd said, Maybe you shouldn't go to work this afternoon. Nah. Rawlins eyed Todd up and down, taking in his dark blue suit, pale blue shirt, and black leather shoes. You look great. But you can't do full execu-drag without a tie. I'll put it on down at the station. Silk, I assume. Only the finest, thank you. He couldn't stop himself from asking, "Are you really all out of pills?" With the sun spilling over him, Rawlins bent forward and, as he blew his nose, nodded. A detective on the Minneapolis police force, he usually looked pretty tough. Not particularly tall, but broad-shouldered and muscular, with cropped brown hair and a face that could look either sweet or much too serious. Today, however, with a red nose and wearing old jeans and a scruffy flannel shirt, he looked like a pathetic boy. "Well, you'll see the doctor in a bit, and I'm sure he'll give you some great drugs." "Oh, my God," moaned Rawlins, reaching for another Kleenex. "I know the doctor said last week that I'm in good health, but I mean to tell you, I am snot hell. Sinus infections are the worst." "Maybe it's an allergy." "It could be, which would explain why you haven't been able to shake it. I do have down pillows. You know, are you allergic to feathers?" "Who knows," said Rawlins with a shrug. "Or it could be, what do you call them? Dust mites. That's what my sister's allergic to." "Then you could be too," suggested Todd. "Be sure and ask the doctor." "I will. Maybe I should see an allergist." Nodding toward his new pet, Todd said, "God, I wonder if it's her." Something small and black and lanky emerged from the hall that led to the two bedrooms. A cat. Todd had never seen a creature more languid or more aloof than this one. He'd had her for almost a month now, and she still refused to let Todd pet her. She barely ate either. He'd never been overly fond of cats. Todd found them much too independent and finicky, and he would never have taken this one except for the special circumstances. "Come here, kitty," called Todd, holding his right hand down low and softly snapping his fingers. "Come here, girlfriend." She paused, glanced at Todd with one eye, then turned and trotted behind the couch. Rawlins watched the course of events and commented, "When are you going to give up?" "She'll come around. You'll see. It's been almost a month. She's in mourning, that's all. Trust me, she knows Kurt died, and she just hasn't gotten over the shock." "Yeah, well, that makes two of us." Todd noticed a little face poke out from behind the couch. "She's making progress. At least she stays in the same room with us now." When Todd clicked his finger together and girlfriend disappeared a second time, he took a sip of coffee and said, "I wonder what she saw that night. If only she could talk." "If only I'd been there, like I was supposed to," Rawlins lamented, for it was he who had been scheduled to stay with Kurt the night he died. "You've got to stop beating yourself up about this. Either it was a genuine mix-up, or somehow Kurt finagled it. Or someone else did. I'm not sure. Kurt had it together enough that week to be so clever. Well, then he'd worked it out in advance with someone. Maybe. But with whom? Just exactly what had happened that night was still a mystery. It was clear that Kurt Anderson hadn't died of complications from AIDS, but from cyanide poisoning. The autopsy, as well as the glass of water found by his bed, made that perfectly clear. Whether it was suicide, an assisted suicide, or a murder, however, had yet to be determined and probably never would. Given the huge number of friends and volunteers Mac had organized to take care of Kurt, and the fingerprints each and every one of them had left behind, there was no conclusive evidence to be found in the apartment. "There's just nothing to go on," continued Rawlins. Todd gazed out the window. "Yeah, but you know, there must have been someone else there. You just don't take a sip of cyanide by yourself and then calmly put the glass down on the bedside table. From what I understand, it works a lot more quickly and violently than that. If he'd drunk it on his own, he probably would have dropped the glass, or spilled it, or something like that. Someone must have helped him. I don't think we'll ever know the truth. No one else at the station is paying much attention, because Kurt would have died soon anyway." Rawlins shook his head. "I should have been there." "Hey," Todd said softly, "you gotta stop thinking like that. You can't blame yourself." Ever since Kurt's death, Rawlins had been in a major funk, sleeping a lot, going about the days under a cloud of lethargy, and even losing his appetite. With that in mind, Todd wasn't surprised that Rawlins had gotten so sick, that the sinus infection had taken such a strong hold. "Anyway," mumbled Todd, Rawlins wiped his nose and asked, "What's your day look like?" "I just have a couple more articles I want to check this morning. The interview will be right after 1. Then I think I'll hang around for the edit this afternoon, see how the thing looks, and do a live intro of the interview on the 5 p.m. news." Rawlins grinned. "Just a regular old working stiff again, aren't you?" Can you believe it? After a lengthy hiatus, Todd was back at it, back on television, which surprised him almost as much as the next guy. After much discussion and indecision, Stella, his agent, the tiniest shark, as she was known, had negotiated a hell of a contract for him with WLAK, Channel 10. His debut story had recently aired a 2-part series about the Mega Mall, the suburban shopping mecca that Todd personally hated, and the economic boon it was proving not to be for the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And while Todd could have let things rest for a while, he was hoping today's interview would be even bigger. Already the station manager had told him that one of the networks had expressed interest in running a clip this evening. Todd took another sip of coffee, set down his cup, and settled back in the chair. I don't know what's harder to believe, that he actually wrote this book or that people are really buying it. What I can't believe is that they found 25 suckers willing to pay $5,000 each to have lunch with him. He's such a turkey. Which actually makes him an easy target, said Todd. But I don't want to be sloppy. Todd checked his watch. Listen, I gotta get going. It's not every day that I get to talk to someone like Johnny Clarendon. Thank God for that. I'm going to have a hard time being objective. Oh, why bother? Rawlins shook his head. The way he goes on and on about the homosexual agenda and the gay disease, why should you have to behave responsibly? Those are radical words for a cop, said Todd. Still, queers everywhere were rallying against Johnny Clarendon's calling AIDS the gay disease, and Todd was going to do what he could to amplify the comment, to make that the marker of his true values, but Todd had to be clever about it, intelligent, direct, sincere. He had to lead the interview down a particular path and make sure that Clarendon said it all over again, and said it even more horribly than before. And Todd could do it in his own mind. He'd conducted the interview more than a dozen times in his imagination. He'd nudged Clarendon this way and that, antagonized, flattered, coerced, charmed, and finally caught the congressman in a trap of his own words. Right. Todd stood up, looked out over the frozen lake. Kurt had been one of Rawlins' closest friends, and while Todd hadn't known him very well, watching that man's life waste and shrivel away had affected Todd like nothing else. He'd never felt sadder, more horrified, nor more proud, of all the while wondering why and how he'd escaped. Why he hadn't made that one innocent, disastrous step. Which was why Todd was going to make sure that Johnny Clarendon would be held hostage to his words about AIDS and gays for the rest of his political career. Here I go, said Todd, caught up by the task ahead and rising to his feet. Hey, I hate to bring up the nitty-gritty of our lives at this particular moment, said Rawlins, wiping his nose with a tissue. But I'm going to do a couple of loads of laundry. Is all your stuff? Yes, Mr. Policeman, I promise all my dirty clothes are in the hamper, replied Todd, who'd finally, after much nagging, quit dumping everything in a pile in the walk-in closet. Now, you get yourself to the doctor, okay? You can't fly to New York next week with sinuses as messed up as yours. Todd went around, kissed Rawlins on the forehead. You're the best. For a brief instant, they grabbed hands and squeezed. The upcoming trip had been Todd's idea, not only as an attempt to perk up Rawlins, but a way to further cement their relationship. Hoping to make it as romantic a getaway as possible, Todd had already made reservations at a swank midtown hotel and his favorite restaurant down in Soho, as well as ordered tickets for a Broadway show. Now it all depended on whether a third course of antibiotics could clear Rawlins' forehead. Todd kissed Rawlins again, then turned, going quickly for the front hall, where his briefcase sat by the door. From his chair, Rawlins called, Let me know what his honorable congressman, the jerk, has to say, and don't forget your tie. It's right here in my briefcase. Suddenly, something black shot in front of Todd. Watching his girlfriend darted into the kitchen, he paused. No, he didn't believe in bad luck, did he? Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.